discussing the exhibitions and artwork being made here and presented here at Da Vinci Art Alliance. And because we have a lot of folks in here who are on the exhibitions committee, we are going to be really focused on the role of thinking about the present and future of all things exhibitions at Da Vinci. And so keeping a mind on what this exhibition, does in the space and how it feels and how it fits into the larger scheme of the programming that we do here. Because the exhibitions committee is in charge of selecting exhibitions from proposals every summer to be in the next calendar year. So keeping that in mind, let's have a conversation about what we're looking at right now. So this is Through the Grid. It is the first members exhibition of the year. And it is featuring around 40 members. Almost everyone here has just one piece. A couple people have two, if there are a couple small works. And this is the first exhibition under our slightly altered system of member shows here. So what that means, to kind of refresh everyone's memory, is that earlier in the year, we had opened rolling submissions for all of our members here to upload whatever they're working on to a larger kind of library inventory catalog of all of our members' artwork, so that a juror, in this case, Sam and myself, can select work from that larger pool and then create an exhibition. That had a lot of different kind of ramifications that we thought would be really positive to change in our member show system, so that we can, for one, get rid of size limits. So unlike other member shows, we can have larger pieces all around the show, and smaller pieces, and that can kind of, in my mind, help build a kind of more cohesive rhythm of works that happen here. So that was one of my main concerns about thinking about this slightly altered version, and so I am really eager to hear some of your all input on how this went and what it looks like. Andrew,
yeah, I just had a question. When we submitted work to the portal, was there already a theme in mind grid? No. Or did that come out as you were looking?
That came out of the work.
Okay.
Yeah, so after seeing the work that was kind of coming out of our members at the time,
right,
you kind of saw a couple of connections, and then we're able to build out this exhibition. Cool. Our thinking with that is we'll be able to make better shows when we can respond to what's already being made, rather than forcing everyone to get into line with whatever dumb idea I come up with.
I totally agree with that strategy.
So, because I know, everyone here has a voice, and it's usually presented through their artwork, and we want to be able to show that, not whatever, I come up with, because that's, a singular narrative.
And it affects the whole creative process for people who don't work that way.
Yeah.
So if you have this ongoing thread and, it pops into a theme that emerges from a larger context, it's good. Maybe you could do both, but
we'll still continue to have jury
shows.
shows.
Yeah.
That'll still happen. So that system isn't really going away. This is just for, our 3 to 4 member shows each year.
And we still have an all-work member show with limited size. So that will be in December upstairs.
Right.
This year. We don't know about next year, but this year it's upstairs.
So we're trying a few things out, and so it's really important for our members to feel like this or whatever happens is a good idea, and feel invested in what happens here, because ultimately it's our job to echo a lot of those ideas out into kind of the resources that we have and the space that we have. So I will stop talking for a bit now, and I want to give time for other people to tell me their thoughts, either about the exhibition system, or just kind of how the show feels in the space, or if you want to talk about any kind of specific works or theme of the show, whatever comes to your mind, feel free to chime in now. Or explore and kind of take in the exhibition, especially if this is your first time seeing it in person.
I spent a little time, as you know, looking at the exhibition before everyone got here, and I really enjoyed the way you guys hung it. like as a painter, I'm always looking at keeping someone's eye on the canvas by the way I choose colors or organize composition. And I feel like looking at the exhibition as a whole, I see kind of different rhythms happening. Like I'm looking at here and I just see a real like wave rhythm. And then back here in the back, I was really appreciating, especially with the black and white pieces, they really talk to each other. There's, the eye on one side and you turn around and there's the, I don't know. So just, well done, I guess, on the way it's hung. I'm wondering if you had the way you were gonna hang it in mind when you selected the pieces, or did you just get all the pieces in the room and kind of see how they work on the wall?
A little bit of both. I've certainly had kind of a lot of experience hanging large group shows in this space. And so I have an idea of kind of what things that I like to look for. For instance, I wanted to make sure going into this exhibition that we had a good amount of small works, a good amount of large works, a fair amount of medium works, things that will allow me to then have the right notes of light, basically. And also kind of represent artists who I know were in the membership that make big work and don't really make small work. And I want to make sure that they have an opportunity to really kind of show themselves in the gallery, because otherwise that was historically pretty difficult to do.
Sure, yeah.
But in terms of like knowing this was going to happen before like install day.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Okay, yeah, I'm really enjoying that.
This is the first show I've seen here, so I feel funny commenting, but I really love how the theme, some pieces are sort of literal or obvious to me, and then others, it's actually felt like sort of a puzzle to figure out like how the piece fit with the theme, and that made it much more interesting walking around, sort of thinking about different ways of interpreting the theme and trying to sort of piece out like what could this piece mean in that context, and with the others made it to me really interesting.
Well, that's good. Yes. So this is the first time we've kind of that theme has been produced after seeing the work, which is new to a lot of people, and so I'm glad to hear that there was like some echo of that you could identify with and pick up on, because sometimes when you have really big group shows, the themes sometimes get a little murky, and I want there to be something to come back to without being too kind of too much of a dictator and pushing people into significantly smaller box, but also not just like chaos. Somewhere in the middle there is probably good.
Since we have so many people and there's also people from home tuning in that don't see everyone when they're talking or like know who's talking, why don't we all, especially because not everyone knows each other, say our names before we talk. Especially since we have some newer people here, so everyone can get to know each other, and also people at home are less confused.
Great idea. Also, I'm Bryant, by the way. I really left that one out. I am one of two co-directors here at the Vinci Art Alliance. Sam, who was just speaking, is somewhere behind the camera also. Yeah. Otherwise, anyone at home, feel free to put comments, questions, ideas into the chat as well. That is your avenue to do that and express yourself. But otherwise, I mean, this is just Quaker style. When God rests on your shoulder, then you can talk, or whatever how that works. I apologize. Any Quakers in the room? Think about it.
So I'm just a little bit unclear. When you started to put this show together, did you have no previous idea at all? Just looked at the work?
We literally did not even look at the submissions till the day that we curated it.
And this just emerged as a theme for you?
Yeah.
When we were doing selections, not like when we, got the work physically in the room.
Right, no, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to look for those grids. I mean, because literally,
Yeah.
they compose many of the pieces. Other ones, you look at Gary and you're like, yeah, Gary, how does he fit into the grid? Well, there's a lot of things to think about that. I'm Andrea, by the way.
Oh, nice. Yes, remembered. I already forgot.
Yeah, one of the things we were thinking about, Roz, as we were curating it that day, was like some of these images started to emerge on themselves, and we started talking about like, okay, as you're walking through the city, what are the like sights and sounds, and like I think Danielle's piece is a good example of that, that like you're seeing like the graffiti, even though it's like for artwork, it also has like the physicality of just like walking down like South Street or something, you know? So like kind of like all of these like scattered images that kind of get like burnt into your brain from living here. That's kind of how we felt as we were looking through everything.
And for me, the more figurative or portraiture work finds its way to that equation because the characters that make up this landscape and the people that inhabit it are just as much as part of an urban environment as the architecture or color or texture as well.
What you're saying is that some of the pieces are the grid and some of the pieces are not the grid.
Some of the things are you
So
physically
either you
being
have
a part
painting
of
that has
it.
a grid, or you have a painting that is not, definitely not a grid, and either one got in.
Or someone could be contemplating a grid.
Right, or
Or thinking about a grid, or
Looking
somehow
through
part
a
of a
grid.
grid.
Yeah, looking through a grid.
I think it has a lot, like for me, it has a lot to do with the physicality of existing in a space that
I'm
is a grid.
sorry.
The physicality of living in a city. So like, especially with Philly, like Philly is a grid. And living within that grid and the things that you experience.
Or using a grid to create it.
I appreciate the idea that you put forth of this, of the city and the grid and the people within that grid. But I'm not sure that if I just walked into the space and looked at the artwork, that I would understand what the unifying theme was. I mean, again, some of them it's very clear, like this one. But then again, and it goes with that. I mean, so there's a geometric theme going through, but then there are these other things, which, so I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying when I come in here, I wouldn't, without the prompts that I've already read about your thinking about the show, I'm not sure I would have understood what the unifying idea was.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's definitely a fair read. Absolutely. And there's going to be some amount of that that's just baked into, I think, what we're able to do here, what a member show consists of. I think one thing that was in my mind is in putting together the show, in particular, as the first of its kind in a way, is don't go too far too fast away from what the previous status quo was to make it so that it felt like I wasn't blowing up anything that had ever come before this moment to build something entirely new. Because there's a lot of people who really love other shows, and so I want to finding a marriage between a lot of these ideas is still important. There's a lot of different people and artists in the community.
And to me, it's still an interesting show in the same way I find any member show interesting, the variety of work, the different approaches that people take.
In previous member shows, it was open to all the members. Not everybody would submit a piece, but generally, how many people would be represented in the whole members show?
Maybe a little more than what's already in here.
So that was an adjustment, I guess.
Yeah.
In your mind.
It also has changed a lot, so like, it used to be that we would have like 75 members represented in a member show.
Right.
But the amount of people who participated in member shows went down over the last few years, that like, we have roughly 40 people in the show. And we were having roughly 40 people in our past like year or two of member shows. Like there were some member shows where we would out of nowhere get a lot more. But the participation went down, and like this is why we transitioned to this show model, was because a lot of that transition away from people participating in those shows seemed to reflect the size limitation.
Wow.
And so we were able to, reach out to a couple people who we probably haven't shown as consistently or with as much frequency as before, or who had entirely other bodies of work that we hadn't seen represented in the gallery. I can reach out to, John Doe and be like, look, I know you have this piece, you haven't been able to show it here. Let me get one of them and we can work this in, and then you can, have that same, representation here in gallery space, this month. And, if it's just giant piece, I'm probably not curating, them into, 3 giant pieces taking up one big wall in every members exhibition, but it allows me to be more flexible with people who make different kinds of work.
That's great, yeah.
So like, for instance, I think like Annie Stone has like 2 small collages in here. As opposed to Joanne who has one big paint. There's kind of a balance and flexibility that this system allows for, that I'm hoping, will be successful in the future.
I have 2 comments from the chat. Nishay says, I love the play of light and shadows on the stairs piece near Brian. It pushes one to reimagine common spaces we often overlook. Which I agree, Nishay. And then Kit asks, do we feel it necessary to have a title for a member show?
That's an interesting question. What do you all think?
And Kit just said, I like it, but as Roz said, is it confusing for the viewer or a challenge that is welcome?
The title?
Yeah.
What do we think?
I would like to add on to that also, with the title, would like a little blurb of context be welcome with it? To kind of explain curatorial decision, or is that also something to take away with the title?
Couldn't be a bad idea.
Honestly, I think the disparate nature of the pieces, even though I understand some of your curatorial groupings, but they're very disparate. And I think a title is forced on top of it, even though there's a couple of grids and stuff, but I think that probably having no title is more representative of what it is, because it doesn't look really a lot like different than other member shows. I think, except for what you said about being able to include less people and more big pieces. But the variety is is so strong that it's not that cohesive compared to some other, like the show last time was 2 people and it was very cohesive, I thought. Aaron and
Yeah.
and there was a sense of there was a pleasure in that. And like other member shows, or like even shows, galleries that have open calls and they just put stuff next to another. It doesn't have that cohesiveness, so I think the fact that it didn't have a title would be more descriptive.
I think some of our mentality going to naming it also was when we name something a member show, the only audience we get are members or relatives of members. So by having it be a different title and not promoting the fact that it's a member show, we've had a lot wider of an audience coming in this month.
That's true, for sure. Get a snazzy title.
How would you all feel about being in a show that didn't have a title? Or did have one?
I like the title. I think was there no curatorial blurb? I didn't notice. There was no. descriptive-
Not physically in the space.
Okay, maybe that would help, but maybe, I wonder if the title were different, that would be, less of a stumbling block for people. I wasn't bothered by the title, but maybe just like a little, I like the idea of a little blurb. It's like, here's what we were thinking, like there's the physicality of a grid, but there's also like the concept.
They did put that up online.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I think it's interesting to have the title, for one, it helps people understand why some work was included and some wasn't. But it also, as you were saying, it starts out maybe as a game, where's the grid? But part of what art asks people to do is think about how they see. So if you start looking at this, you start to look for the grid, but then you start thinking about what is a grid. I mean, and there's a texture here that isn't a square grid, but it infers almost like a twisted grid. You start looking for it, and that's an interesting training for the eye. So I think that's very successful. Once you get past that, oh, here's the crossword puzzle, you know. That's the first thing your mind does, they take that leap. So I think it's very effective.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Diane Lockman says, as an artist in the show who works with the grid, I was pleasantly surprised at the definition of the title was not literal. It's beautifully hung, and I think it makes people notice the relationship between the paintings.
And the forms within the painting.
Yeah.
Macro and micro. Right down to the brush strokes. I mean, some of them I'm looking at them up there, it's the brush stroke that make you think of a grid. Because there's this awareness to some of the strokes. So it's making you think on all different kinds of levels. Very effective.
How are we doing on time?
We're almost at time.
I guess, when I asked for kind of last thoughts about, this exhibition, your system in any way, or, it sounds like, having some written statements actually physically in the room might be something that we're, okay, generally, okay, cool. That's definitely, actionable for sure, so thank you.
There may be written statements with contributions, like Penny's observations about the breadth of what a grid could be. I think are very helpful in how folks that might not have that same vocabulary, it might guide them to be able to understand, the individual artist perspective, it's not just in the piece, but how, like you said, but those were there. What is the grid? How does it function and all that stuff? I think that's really.
That's interesting. I'll think on how we can logistically make that happen in the time frame. But yeah, okay. Cool. So should we head upstairs?
I think we shall.
All right.
I'm gonna mute the chat or the Zoom call really quick, so none of you hear us shuffling and get very disturbed.
All right.
And welcome back, everyone in the chat, to Scott's exhibition now.
Yes, so we are looking at a solo show from Scott, who's right, I guess, behind me here, wherever camera you're looking at. Oh gosh, what else do you have to know about the show? It's a solo show, it's Scott. We intentionally have the lights off. I guess you want to start there, Scott, and tell us about what we're maybe looking at, or anything that you want us to know coming into this, as if it's, you know, a cold read.
Sure, thank you very much. As far as the lights go, I just want the room to be able to enjoy this fantastic natural light that comes through these windows. Sometimes it's a little more illuminated, sometimes it's a little less illuminated, but I feel like that's okay. You know, the paintings sort of respond the way they're going to respond. The way conditions change all the time in our lives, you know, we have to respond. That's how the paintings behave. I made some benches for us to sit on and enjoy. The intent there is to be able to take a couple of minutes. Enjoy the light, enjoy how our perception of the paintings changes as the light changes. Try to appreciate how the forms relate to each other. So over here is 6 smaller pieces. The triptych is a single piece, and then the little piece on the wall over here. But the way that it was conceived is that, you know, I visited the space after we thought I'd have a show, and then after I visited the space, sort of these pieces arose in my mind in this state. And so then I worked to manifest these forms to be in the space as we see it now. The specifically pertains to the triptych and the piece on the wall. I knew there would be 6 pieces over here on this wall of this shape, but I didn't know specifically what the forms would be. So, and what that shows is how there are different methods that we can use in our process, in our creative process. One is to have the form be manifest in our mind and then work to manifest the form out in the space. But another is to respond to the process as it occurs and as we interact with it, and then try to discover what forms are going to manifest out of the process. And that's what this is over here. So we have it's a sort of a little demonstration of how our imagination might function in the process of creating the forms. The benches are intentional. So there's 3 benches to match the 3 paintings, or just a fit to create another aspect of a dynamic relationship. These rectangles are called whirling squares, or, you know, golden sections, which is a specific kind of rectangle that some folks think have a sort of pleasing proportion. There's a spiral that is manifest inside those rectangles that occurs, you know, in nature, in our bodies, and all sorts of mathematical calculations about systems, flows, and all that stuff. Fractals. And the benches are part of that system. The benches each have 3 whirling squares in them. So the top of the benches are squares. At the sides, these are whirling squares. So that panel right there is the same as that shape right there. There's 2 of those on each side, but they're divided by another whirling square in the middle. So in that way, I think about how there's just so many different ways that we can engage in this process, and how our imaginations just really don't have much of a limit in how we can manifest forms, you know, that just explodes. So if we take one of the paintings on the wall and turn it sideways, and we see that you can fit 1 on each side of the section. So those are divided by the same geometry. So if I'm standing here and then I have 2 paintings out here, now I've made a triangle, and that triangle can shoot out to infinity, replicating itself, you know, from the basis of these benches. So that's another way to manifest fractals. this is related to those forms and that these are figure ground relationships. Over here, we still have a figure ground relationship, but the figure is on the wall and the ground is the space. So it's different ways. They're all variations on the same thing. This piece also talks about music. The subtitle of this piece is A Pattern in a Chromatic Field. And that's based on a piece of music by a composer named Morton Feldman. And he liked to make music for painters. And I never noticed it. They may be out there, but I didn't ever notice any painters making paintings for him. So I thought I'd make one. So this is, his music helped me manifest these paintings, along with other musicians, but specifically Morton Feldman.
I was just listening to his piece for the Rothko Chapel.
Yeah, there you go. So that's a seminal piece, and, so his music is influential and his practice as a composer as well, and that he would often encourage his performance to go slower and be quieter, go slower and be quieter. And that's a practice I try to have in my process as well, that it's helpful to me, and everybody's process is different, right? But it's helpful to me at this stage of my process to try to go slower and be quieter. And when I am quieter, then I can listen better and I can have a better relationship with the forms. So that's a brief, that's the elevator version.
All right, yeah, so I'm thinking about this exhibition kind of in the larger picture of what Da Vinci's programming looks like. This is solo show. We've seen a lot of really wonderful solo shows up in this space over the years, and I think this one definitely is going to be an important one that I'll have to spend a lot of time thinking about. So I'm really personally had a wonderful time painting the show with you, and I think that a lot of these very unbelievably careful considerations has paid dividends in transforming this space to fit your needs. So kudos.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in your proposal, was using the ambient light, like specifically part of your vision? when you
I
came
don't
forward
remember
with the
that, but I
idea?
do remember that making sure there was no artificial light was really important, in the
Right.
process, just because this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
pretty wacky. I've been in a lot of gallery spaces, and this light is, and one of the folks that visited during the opening, she's a writer, poet. And, she comes in and she's looking around. The first thing she said was, "Well, light in here." And I said, "I know, it's crazy, right?" And she said, "Do they have like sugar-coated gauze on the windows?" How do they do that? But that's how every time I come into space, that's how it feels. to
It's
me.
beautiful. It's beautiful, and your work really
Thank you.
takes great advantage of the light. I mean, in this moment, you can find a better environment for these pieces.
Thank you.
Perfect for this.
So I think for
space.
Da Vinci, it's nice that you're able to consider works that are making full advantage of that, making the space like really a part of the installation.
I
like,
think
really
that's something
directly.
we talk about a lot on the
Yeah.
exhibition committee, and then like as the staff is thinking of this specific gallery space as more of like an installation, like transformative space, because like, especially every single exhibition that we've done since we came in as directors has just been like completely different from one another, and using the space in such a different way that like it feels like a different like size even sometimes, or like the light is completely different, or like I think like Robert did all of the light in his show, and then this is the opposite of that, but it's still using light in an intentional way.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, it's exciting. I love this space.
Yeah,
And this is a more meditative space than downstairs.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even my show, which was lit up and had some fun. There was, for me, a similar feel to a slower read.
Yeah.
Great show.
Thank you very much.
Just in the few minutes we've been sitting here, the light has changed, or my perception of the pieces has changed
Really
just
wild,
in these
isn't it?
few minutes. It's fabulous. That one's glowing. That piece, well, now it shifted again. But the bottom, the part of it was just glowing more, and just, I think, the perfect show in here.
It's really
Thank you so
cool
much.
too, because the light, like, because we're here all day watching the light change, so like Ronnie posted a photo yesterday that was taken like in the middle of the night where
I saw
like
that.
all of the
Yeah,
windows,
so cool.
like reflect onto this wall,
Yes.
and but also like glow.
That was a
It
beautiful.
was a beautiful
Yeah.
photograph,
So
yeah.
it's just really cool watching the space change.
Yeah, thank you. It's, and the shape of the room is really, it's a good shape. You get a little bit higher ceilings, which is really nice, you know. So-
Can you talk about your angle?
So the name of that piece is Slant Slope Lean. And it has to do with all the story that where there was a guy who followed a practitioner that, and he was concerned that he wasn't doing a good job practicing. So the practitioner, the teacher said, well, listen, when he was concerned that he was gonna die and it wasn't gonna be a good death. And the teacher said, well, listen, if there's a tree that's slanting, sloping, and leaning to the east, which direction is the tree going? Fall, when it falls. And he said, well, it's gonna fall to the east. He said, you're right. So all you gotta do, just incline yourself towards helpful behavior. So this piece to me is a reminder to myself to just incline myself to helpful behavior, a little bit at a time. I can't do a lot at a time. I have to stay grounded. But if I do just a little bit at a time, and that's helpful to me, it's helpful to my family, it's helpful to people. So that's that piece, right? And the other piece then of the story is, how does this relate to the story of pain? Right, post, late 20th century pain, post-AVX, monochrome, all that stuff. So I make these paintings with the intent of wanting to participate in that story, but that can't ever be the first intent. The first intent has to be just to make the images and have them be able to have folks interact with them who have no idea what postmodern abstraction is, because that's not of interest to most folks. What I'm hoping is of interest to some folks is the ability to sit in the room quietly and just enjoy the forms.
Which I think, so Nishay said in the chat, which I think this is a good parallel to what Nishay said, who I think now left the chat. Well, anyway, I'll say the comment.
Sure.
Scott's exhibition was the most challenging for me, since at least for most figurative work, there is some sort of frame of reference. For this, there is only color, simple forms, light and shadow, which I think is reminiscent of what you were just saying, that it is a space that you have to sit in, like the spaces are part of the work.
And part of what I think about a lot is, and we were talking about it a little bit downstairs with the title of the show, right? Great. So did that arise after you guys got the work submitted or before?
The title?
Yeah,
After.
after, okay. So for me, titles go to story. What is a story, right? And in my process, what I've discovered is this is part of a story that I'm trying to tell, right? And for artists who work sometime in this manner, who say, well, my work is non-narrative, there's no story. Actually, what they've done right there is declare that their story is that there's no story. So it's a little bit of an oxymoron. So I came to the realization that most things are a story. And as human animals, one of the basic things I observed that we need to do is tell a story and be engaged in a story. So as you're looking at these pieces, you guys together, like the story group, right? And that story is like a way for us to share information together. So Shay's expressing that I didn't do a good enough job setting the context for these forms. And I'm working on trying to figure out how I can do that. But I totally admit that there's room for me to bring more information, right? For people to engage in the work so that the story that I want to tell is something that they can relate to, right?
I think that's like the eternal struggle too, because I like Liv is nodding too. Like I struggled with that, because you never, like, I don't want to have to describe, like, have an essay that accompanies every work for someone to
Right,
get it,
exactly.
But then like sometimes you have experiences where you're like, I feel like I put enough out there and now I want you to kind of like take it and run with it.
Come to me a little bit.
Yeah.
What I found out, for me, there's never enough, mostly. There's an audience that can come in here and know exactly what's happening, right? The audience is pretty tiny. So it's my job to try to, I think for me, it's my job to learn how to broaden that scope. Make the story more relatable, you know. And one of my statements that I wrote, it's about that my work, creating my work is about listening. Well, I want to make sure that I'm communicating something that can be heard, that can be listened to.
I think part of it too is like, I'll say this as the staff here. Like I think it's also our role as the people who are showing your work is to like translate that story too, you know, so like we have a tour group that comes in and like whoever's giving the tour will like talk about whoever's work is up, you know, and like give the audience like a better understanding of what the artist was thinking about. And I think like Ronnie and I were talking about this at the opening, that like the first ladies who came in that day, they like were looking at all the member work and then they came up here and one of the ladies was like, well, this is the show. And then just kind of like did a quick circle and went down, and that made me realize like, oh, like some people we have to like give a little more context when they come in, you know, because it isn't like for everyone, or not. I think it is for everyone, but not everyone is there yet. Like they don't realize that it's for them yet.
That's well said, and that's I'm working out how I can create a text that. You'll notice my text doesn't really have what I term art writing in it. I feel like there's been enough art. For me, I'm not good at art writing because I get lost. You know what I mean? So I want to be able to create a text that it's sort of, I'll let art writers do art writing. But I want to create a text that helps with that storytelling, the context, I guess is what I'm saying. So
You have to balance the background mathematical, proportion that you're talking about that some people are familiar with and some people are not. I met a woman with a tattoo of this very golden, I got the terminology wrong, on her neck, and I said, oh, that's cool, it's like a scarf. What? She thinks it's a seashell. Cool. It is. Well, I'm very interested in the texture that you have. I think it's very elegant. And it has almost a liquid motion to it. The more still you are, the more it flows, which is very interesting, especially as our eyes adjust to the light. I'd like to know more about how you generated that.
how they were painted?
Yeah, like, or what was your, because you said it was part of the same mathematical fractal equation.
Well,
So is it literally, or am I being too
No,
literal?
it's not literally part of that,
Okay.
but that sits below the,
It's always
the
there.
process.
Yes,
right?
okay. They're
So
very.
thank you, the way they're manifested, so I painted, so all these pieces are on the Dibond panel, which is like a little aluminum panel. And I prepare them the way I want them to be. These are back with, the three on the wall are back with aluminum angle, and I assemble them with some epoxy resin. The piece Slant Slope and Lean is built on a plywood box that I made. And then the six on the wall are the same Dibond panels framed. So I'm trying to use the exact same materials and expressing a variation on theme, right? And all the paint it's the same paint, which is I get the paint pigments separate. I mix my own binders to get what I want. So I get the paint, the physical character. It's important the way the paint releases from the brush, right? That act. So you commented on that basically as you're describing the verticals, right? So it's very important that the pigment be able to release from the brush in a certain way. Okay. So that's you see that manifested there very clearly. So that's the little bit of the hardware piece. So as far as painting those, so I painted each of those panels. They each have anywhere from 5 to 8 different layers on them to get to those final colors. And if you look at each panel, you'll see the variation between the top layer and the layer underneath. And that difference creates a resonance, right?
That's why they glow.
And that's what that is. So it's a little bit like a little op art trick,
Right,
but there it is.
It's all paint.
It's just painted, right? So then, once I got the colors in a manner that I thought worked, then they stayed on the wall for about 6 weeks while I tried to figure out what the final verticals were gonna be.
Yeah.
In the process of painting the panels, I also painted pieces of paper the same colors, so I could keep a record of what that was. So I would have, half a dozen of the first panel color, the second panel color, and the third panel color, but I had to do it in process. Right, because you can't go back and remix the color and
Yeah,
have it be
right.
the same, and plus the
The layers,
resonance
yeah.
piece, right? So then, once I got those colors done, then I had to figure out which colors for the verticals were gonna be. And I knew, I saw it in my mind what they were gonna be, but as we know, there's a little distance between those two spaces, right? So then I started painting the verticals, right? And then when I got to where on the paper, and then, so when I got to the color that I thought those were gonna be, then each one of those is one shot to get that surface right.
Gotcha.
So I cover it with paper, except for a space in the middle. And
Gotcha.
those are painted freehand down the middle, just one little mark at a time. But it has to happen in one shot because of the characteristics of the paint. It wants to dry right away.
Yeah.
Acrylic paint doesn't really want to hang around. It wants to dry right away. So it's a process of going slow, being quiet, no distractions. I don't get out of my chair until I've checked with my body that I have little or no extraneous activity happening, right?
Yeah.
And then I pick up a brush and start doing my thing.
I find fascinating the element of time, because it's not just time is such a part of your process. And then you're asking the viewer to come in and take time.
Yeah.
And then the paintings change over time with the light. So I just think it's a beautiful metaphor.
Thank you.
All about time. And I think that's maybe you're asking everybody that comes into the show to take time, and it's needed in the world. Lots of people are rushing and not taking the time, and the people that kind of are missing it, that's what they need the most. So I almost think you're engaging the viewer, but they may not be ready to hear it. Those, like you were saying,
It took
How
me a
to
long
open
time.
that.
It took me a long time to do it myself. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to share what I learned,
well, I think you are.
Thank you.
I think it's successful. So.
Thanks very much.
I want to share what Kit said in the chat, which is, I also want to tell Scott that the presentation of these pieces are subtle and beautiful. The large triptych pieces are just slightly off the wall and float. It's hard to tell that online for those that haven't been in to see it. Also, there is a hand-done quality to these pieces that get lost online. So it's more directed to the chat, but for you, it's subtle and beautiful.
And the hand-done piece is really important, but it's because it's about the process of using my hands to make the work. And, we're all makers here, so we appreciate what it means to use our hands in a task and how that process can be healing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a vital part of what happens for me of making these. What I described to somebody, I sent an email, is, this bizarre behavior of making these things. And if you think about it, it's a little weird.
Can you tell us a little bit about the title? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I was just gonna ask.
Yeah, sure. So the title of the installation is Winter's Poem for Spring Prelude. And so what that is intended to indicate is that this is these forms, that this room is the poem that winter created and gave to spring. So it's the gift that winter, in the form of a poem, gave to spring. And that has to do with, transition, things that arise, fade, patterns, right? Seasons or patterns, these are patterns. There's variation. So it's just part of the overall metaphor of that, over the narrative, right? Narrative of a poem. So thank you, Brian. It's a visual poem, But then another poem happens if you're able to give it a couple of minutes and sit on a bench. Another poem happens in your mind, right? As you're relating to the forms and whatever story comes up. You know, typically when we're looking at art or painting or anything, mostly what happens is the stories come up right away, right? And anybody who's meditated, you know, we're well familiar with the stories coming up. But what I'm wondering is, can we settle the stories just for a second and see if we can notice what the experience is? So there's stories and then there's experience, right? Stories typically happen in our mind. Experience typically happens in our bodies. So I'm trying to create a space that will slow our minds down a little bit, even after I talk about all the stories that I put into these things. But the bottom is that I want it to be able to slow us down into our bodies, right? So that there's something that we can notice in art that's happening in our bodies. So that's, and the other piece I wanted to mention was, these are like different forms of a breath. The verticals, okay?
Like meditation.
Right. And that's what we have over here too, right?
I don't know how well this translates for people at home either. But like, I love this grouping so much, and like the bottom middle and the end cap on the right top, I am just so drawn to all the time, especially the one in the bottom middle. Like the blue that comes through from the background is just like what you were talking about earlier of like, you're a part of this conversation with like Abex and all, and like Hard Edge and everything from the past, but it's like, this is your addition to that conversation. Like those two pieces, I mean, I feel like that in the whole show, but especially those two pieces for me, I'm like, yes, this.
And I think that what comes through in all of them is the strong to the intentionality.
Good, thank you.
Because I don't think it would come through on Instagram, because, you know, what, the fact that the verticals almost seem like our lives in the background of our lives, because the verticality of a human, and they're sort of like these things stand here sort of very bravely, because they're so fragile because of that variation in, you know, in stroke, and the light coming through from the fact that the translucence of the figure against the ground also represents that we are, you know, translucent in a way. And the slowness, I mean, one of the suggestions I was going to make to Sam was put a time lock on the door. And just
That's
don't let anybody out.
probably.
And you can program it, you know, depending on who's coming in, program it for water. But some people do get it, but, yeah, I think you mean it, you know, it's very clear in these things that you seriously mean. And it comes across, and I think that's the magic of painting, is that you can, you know, you could look at the same exact, you know, what is it, 3.14 ratio and everything, and if these were made, if these marks were made more regularly, or maybe with a machine or on a digital computer, you could look exactly the same. There'd be nothing in the room. There'd be nothing to experience. So I think it's one of the most successful shows I've seen in a long time.
Thank you very much.
And there's a guy, Doug Whitman, you know?
I know his work.
Yeah. This is a little less human, but than this, which is, I think, really human stuff. So, I love it.
Thank you.
Is this the last day for this show?
Wednesday.
Wednesday? Okay, so if someone comes Wednesday, they can still come out.
Yes.
Yeah, the shows all stay up all of Wednesday, and then first thing Thursday, we go into deinstall mode.
It's all out of here.
Just throw it out the window.
That's why we have such good windows, because all the work goes out.
I got a flatbed truck.
Yeah, I think,
This is, I don't want to put something too much, like in thoughts, right, and respect, and respect this idea of experience, but at the same time, it is about experience, especially after what Robert was saying, it just came to me, the idea in which phenomenology approaches things, so, well, there is this idea for existentialists and phenomenologists that and that goes a lot with the idea of meditation and experience meditation, that our consciousness is just pure nothingness. And so what we are is really what we perceive. And all this space and the idea that we can make choices about what is the background and what is the foreground, there's no obligation in seeing something as the background or the foreground. And we really, I mean, I'm gonna stop, but it's just this space, this experience is about just being and becoming what you're given. So just, I don't know. So yeah, that's what came to me right now. Thank you.
yeah, I mean, I can't believe I didn't, immediately make that connection, because I was drilled the poetics of space into like my undergrad for so long that it just burned into my mind. But yeah, sitting at vicariously sitting at Gaston Bachelet's, desk or whatever feels very similar to, these stools and being in here and letting what's immediately in front of you, wash over you, and anything that's not immediately in your frame of reference or being able to, bodily experience it doesn't exist.
Maria Lindenfelder, I hope I'm not saying your last name wrong, Maria, says, I keep thinking that these feel like if Joseph Albers met Burnett Newman and it merged. And she also said, so beautiful and quietly sophisticated.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting how these forms, I think for me, at immediate point of reference, structurally look like an Albers exercise, but then after a half a second realize it is nothing like that at all. And it's just the form happens, the color happens, and then it goes to a very, very different psychological space. But you're still able to take those very useful bits from Albers to do your own thing.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions at all? Anything?
It's interesting to see this vertical form as a human figure, like the essential, when you pare it all down, we're just like these vertical sticks most of the time. And a friend across the street in the wind exhibit, Haraj Bavikian, he's making these large sculptures that are very somewhat ephemeral, but also very rooted in their materials. And they hang from the ceiling as these sort of totems, but he specifically references human figure through these verticality. It's lovely, and it's good at just making that connection in my mind right now. If you want to simplify everything down, it's
And that's part of what this piece is about, and that's part of one way to view this piece is to be right here.
yes,
And when you're here, it sort of starts to, it gets up in your face a little bit. Not a lot, but just a little. And then when you're doing this, the color starts to shift a little bit, and the space sort of zooms out, and the plane dissolves, right? So the color's still there, but the plane dissolves. And
that's nice.
that was one of the things that I was trying to
Why three?
Three is the smallest, there are many reasons, right? One reason is three is the smallest number we can get to have a dynamic relationship and possibly a chaotic relationship, and chaos as in unpredictable, right? So chaos just means our inability to perceive what the order is, right? So there is a system, we might not be able to understand all the conditions that get to that system, but there's a system, right? The conditions, everything's based on set conditions. Three typically creates a dynamic.
So none of the
situation.
other meanings of three came into.
There are several other.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Trinity, I was thinking about the triangle as being the most solid. That points out.
And I spoke about a triangle, right?
Oh,
goes
that one,
out.
yeah.
Different. I sort of want to create some forms that allow you to put you know what I mean, your experience on them. I've got all sorts of ideas about why three works here. And some early Buddhist practice, you know, the three jewels are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So that's an important thing. There's the three attributes of acknowledging that something exists, acknowledging that it arises, and acknowledging that it dissipates. And that, you know, that's the basis of all conditionality. So those ideas are what are the foundations, right? Of how I've come to learn how to be able to perceive how I can behave in life, you know. Along with anything else that you feel like tossing, as long as it's helpful, right? I want it to be helpful.
That goes back to how much you put into the art of statement, because if you completely direct the vision, then whatever people bring to it might get quashed.
I
And you
prefer
want that
not, right?
conversation
I
at the
prefer
very
not.
least. It's a fine line.
So I try to have it be as open as possible, right? And I brought somebody up and I was sharing some of my ideas with him, and he said, look, I like the paintings, I don't know anything about my painting, these are really nice, and I wouldn't have been able to see them without your explanation. I challenge you to guide me better. And I thought that was well said, you know, so I accept this challenge. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna work to be able to generate text that is a better guide, you know.
Maybe look first, read, look again.
Maybe, yeah.
All right, I think we want to head upstairs for the last leg of this race here, and we're going to be looking at some very different kind of painting. Okay. Wait, there you go. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna mute everyone again, and then I will unmute when we're all set up upstairs. To see Kathleen Burke, who is our artist in residence this month.
Kathleen yet. Hi, Kathleen. How are you? Who are you and why are you here? Please tell us.
So I'm Kathleen Bosley, and I am the artist in residence for March. And it's been really, really, really fun being here. You guys have been really nice hosts.
Oh, thank you. And if you didn't realize coming in, it's right across this wall. Is our residency studio, where Kathleen has spent a lot of time making some paintings, and we're looking at a few of them here.
Yeah, so it's tough to follow Scott, but I will say it's been lovely, you know, I'm working up here. My goal was minimum of 20 hours with a brush in my hand during the residency. So going down at night and just having that space to sort of decompress and walk through was it was quite lovely. So it's been a really interesting, I feel super special to get that relationship with his work for the past month. So these, I have a show at the Monmouth Museum in September. So part of the residency was a great opportunity that I could bring some of the pieces to pull them all together. It's kind of at that last phase. I have about 15 pieces for the show. Some of them are larger. The concept, they were all, I paint crowds. All these are crowds during the pandemic because that's the only places people were meeting in groups. What happens, why I'm kind of interested in crowds is it's the headspace that you're in. So what happens is when you're in a crowd, you're managing various identities. You have a personal identity, your group identity, and then the crowd's identity. Crowd becomes a mob when you lose personal identity. So I have in the show, I have a painting of the insurrection, painting of the inauguration. So you can see the different energy of the crowd within 6 days, same space. So this is happening in one scene at the same time as this. Again, thinking about art history, like Scott was. This is a Flemish dead painting. The first layer is this is the underpainting. I'm in the process of glazing over it. So I want it to look historical, play on the historical of how paintings were painted in the past, but also that it looks like a dated picture. And then you realize that it's, you see the Biden sign and the pink hat, and you start realizing, oh, this is contemporary, this is now, because history keeps repeating itself. Playing with the idea that photographers use black and white when they do anything with Martin Luther King, rather than color, and they had color images. So there's an interesting dynamic. Also, the black and white is kind of funny in painting, or monochrome. I feel like there's a sense of nostalgia. So in some of the other images for the show, I've been doing even Instagram filters with different generations and painting some of those distortions. So it's a funny kind of contemporary historical play, but that's what's going on here. So they're not done. Things have to loosen some stuff up, tighten some stuff up to bring them together. And I need a title for the show. So if anybody has some, that's due at the beginning of the month. So it was funny, I went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art on Saturday, and they have a show up that in the contemporary wing, and it was waiting for the tear gas, and it was all artists' response to social challenges. So it's been really, that was kind of helpful to see. So if anybody's interested in this genre of work, I recommend going. Anybody have questions, comments?
Could you tell us more about how you were talking to me earlier about pairing, how the smaller paintings relate to larger paintings?
Yeah.
How these two.
Okay, so these are like mid-sized paintings, and then I have bigger paintings that are 50 by 40. 50 by 40 of the big crowd that's happening. And then there's a macro for every scene that goes with it. So This is a mid-sized one, but it kind of encompasses what's going on at the same time. So you see the overall scene, then you have this one person. So you kind of get to zoom in and be a little bit more intimate to kind of capture that feeling of individual personality and identity versus the group identity. The other really fascinating thing is we gathered in pods prior to the pandemic. And people were all freaking out, like, now we're pods, we can't do it. Even in my painting downstairs in the members show, you see that everyone is gathered in a pod and always has been. And I find that really fascinating that the spaces, you can tell the relationship of the people with how they're standing. You can tell this is actually mother and daughter. I didn't know that at the time, but I've since met them. And then these are their friends. And then that's a stranger. And you can tell all that just by their body language and their proximity. Acquaintance. So it's kind of really, I just find that really interesting. And yeah. Other questions?
You have a picture, you have a painting of a crowd that's a mob,
I do.
and the faces that display the lack of personal identity, the suspending of.
Yeah.
That'd be fascinating. to see.
Yeah, and I painted it really thick too, super thick. It was kind of hard. It's kind of funny, I have in the studio a beach painting because I sort of needed these palette cleansers. I don't know if you guys find this when you're painting, because you have to feel that, right? So you're feeling those emotions because that goes into it. So I needed the paint to be angry and I needed it to be the feeling of the crowd. Crowds are generally very safe and they have a bad reputation, but they're actually very, very, very safe. Moms are what are dangerous. And so I had to get into that angry place. So I started having to do these beach paintings to sort of cleanse my mood, to be pleasant to be around when I was working on some of those angrier pieces. Yeah.
And you must know Mary Henderson.
Yeah, that's why I applied, because she is one of the heads of the residency. So yeah, I've been painting crowds for 20 years. My husband is a huge baseball fanatic and I really don't like baseball. And they're really long. So I used to go to the games and start painting all the crowds at all the stadiums. And 20 years later, it's sort of morphed into this. So that's how I come to all of this.
Yeah, Kathleen and I were talking earlier about how there aren't that many people who paint crowds, you know, and like Mary got selected as our residency director, and then Kathleen knows of Mary's work and applied because she likes Mary's work, and like now like two of like the few crowd painters are like working together in this program, and it's like a really interesting dynamic.
It's been really great working with her. She's given me some color exercises to do and challenged me in different ways than I was expecting. So, you know, coming here, you want to leave yourself open to explore those new things. So, you know, I put some of these on hold for a while. I'm just at like the glazing stages, and it's good because I needed space to dry, and tried some of, you know, her suggestions. Made a couple of really bad paintings, but those are the ones you learn the most on, right? So, yeah.
Well, I think from our end too, it's been really interesting seeing your process, because like I don't know anything about painting. And like when I see this, I'm like, oh wow, she just like knew how to do this. Like just every single like paint by number area, she knew where to put paint. But then like seeing your process of like starting out with silhouettes and like going in from like the different stages, it's been really like nice. Like seeing like the behind the scenes of your work.
Yeah. And it's been nice getting feedback from you guys too. I have 3 kids, and so my studio is at home. So part of this is I've realized that, oh my God, I can get so much done in a 6-hour time block. Where it's like, okay, maybe I need to think about how to structure my time better. And it's also just been really nice to have conversations, especially with you two and Ronnie, about just art, because I don't get that. I mean, you just don't in my normal day to day. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity and the conversation.
Well, we're grateful for your conversation.
And getting to see Scott's work every day.
Good question. I'm curious when you said that where crowds are safe, but mobs are dangerous. With photographing and painting, what do you see as the distinction in a crowd becoming a mob?
So again, it's the loss of identity. It's like somebody loses themselves. So, and social psychologists, which now like I hang out with them all online and Twitter because there's like 5 of us that find this super fascinating. They're kind of diving into that now because globally there is a sense of nationalism, which is problematic. And so they're going to the social psychologists to sort of figure out why. And what is that? And really has the internet changed some of that? Because now crafts can form in different ways. So that's the other part of the show. And I kind of haven't been discussing it because I don't really, the language is still coming and the science behind it, or theory behind it, not science. You know, all of these were gathered. The gatherings were all created online and social media. So what does that do? And in some of the crowds, they're fascinating when you look at how they're structured, because in some ways the people are further apart because they're social distance, and in other ways closer together. And there's a very different dynamic happening spatial wise within the crowds during 2020. And maybe it takes more time to process. But to answer your question, they don't really know other than that's a loss of identity and self. And that's when you can commit crimes because you don't feel responsible.
For the show, are all of the crowds and images from political generated crowds, or would some like that Travis Scott concert where that crowd kind of turned violent inward be the appropriate subject?
Right.
Or no?
For this one, they're all from just 2020.
Okay.
I did just get permission to go into the school and take some pictures. I thought that would be kind of fascinating and play on it to get the kids in the masks and face shields. But now they don't have that anymore. It took over 6 months to get approval to get into the school district. So that might be another separate thing. I have to stay away from some of that darker stuff because you become what you paint. It's what you're thinking. I really think what Scott was saying, your artwork is a meditation. You know, you're spending hours painting something, and that time means something. You see the time and the work. People know that somebody spent a lot of time to make that painting, and that changes in the meaning. And so I think I have to do a little bit more work of what I want to be spending my time on. And I don't know that I want it to be the mob. I think it was needed to pull the vision for this show, but I don't know that I really want to be making people feel that. I don't know that I don't want to be feeling that.
It's fair. I think that's just my attraction to Goya. It's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good thing to do that, and as long as you can come back.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's very important that's what great actors do, you know, because if they didn't really, you know, but the thing is, they come back, and that process of being there really, and then coming back to makes the, what you're calling that, unless you do lose yourself, and if you're worried about that, then I wouldn't be careful.
Right.
But, you know, there's also one other thing about this, there are places where you lose yourself to crowd identity, to mass identity, and it's not necessarily. I mean, I'm thinking of ecstatic religious experiences, I'm thinking of being, the times it's happened to me briefly, were at certain concerts. And it was like the joy, it became a single thing.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to not do that. And when the concert was over, unfortunately, I was not there. So it's not always that when you lose your individual identity, it is a bad thing. It's very dangerous if it's permanent.
Right.
But then coming back and going there is a wonderful journey. It could be.
It's interesting.
I want some whirling dervish paintings.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's wonderful. Yeah.
The other things, most of them, except not this one, but most of them are all about women. And I noticed threads, you know, women empowerment and women using their voice.
It's interesting when we're talking about meditative states, which is, you know, losing ego. And yet your description of losing ego is to step into the criminal potentially. So it's an interesting dynamic.
In terms of a
between-
crowd.
Right, but an interesting dynamic in terms of
Yeah,
what, it could go either way,
yes.
depending on how, you know, the situation you're in and your motivation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have a friend an acquaintance who started meditating quite literally 12 plus hours a day because her husband was dying in a gruesome way and she couldn't handle it. And she's come back from that, but she had to lose herself to tolerate that. And then you talk about like women's roles, a lot of these issues were women finding a voice, which is stepping out of the role. So you've got ego and role. It's a very interesting dynamic, especially with a beautiful painting, magnificently done.
Thank you.
Did you work from photographs that you took yourself, or is this from online photographs?
All of them, except for the insurrection, and all of them are my photos, except for two, which I got permission from the photographers, and it's really nice. We've had a relationship since reaching out to them. And part of my process, some of them are, I not purely photorealist, I do change the photos. This one was created, this is like three photos put together, it happened, but not exactly in that, you know, they needed to be a little closer together, so I edit them a little bit in terms of that. You can see one in the studio right now where the photo's next to it, and you can see where I'm moving the people and the composition just to make it a little bit more dynamic.
How much more work do you have to do for the show?
These are my last couple, and they're close. I think I'm pretty close.
Okay.
There's one more that's a big one that I could do, and it's a question now: do I need it? I rushed it, and I don't like it, and I can tell that I rushed it, so I'd have to go back and repaint the parts that I rushed. Is that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't feel comfortable hanging it in the state that it is. And I think I'm being overly critical, but that's where I'm at. So, and it's a big one. So it's like, do I want to take a month and repaint this? Or let it go? But it's to be cohesive, because I was kind of getting into that dead color palette thing, and I just didn't. The underpainting is too alive.
Oh, yeah, I see that. That would be a hard thing to resurrect
There, yeah.
or kill or whatever the right
Yeah.
terminology for that would be.
So that's the issue with it. I think it got me to some other pieces, but I don't know that that's necessarily needed. So that's where I'm at. So I think I'm almost done.
How did you come to this technique, to this painstaking, historically referenced way of
So not all are painted in that, like this is a quick, like plein air 2-hour painting. So it depends on the piece that I was doing at, what it needed. You know, as you're developing a show, you're kind of thinking about the overall concept and what it's needed. And so the idea of nostalgia, this idea of the black and white images, and then, like I said, I did that, the one that my veiled painting is, it's an underpainting that I had on it. And I liked that the underpainting was there, but the color was too bright. And so I had to get to that dead palette. So then I go back to the Flemish, and I like that play in art history. So that's sort of my thought process. Each painting, you have to keep it interesting for yourself. So I like to approach every painting is slightly different. Some are done thicker because that's what it needed. Some are done thinner, some are done quicker, and it needed that. That's how I like to, I get bored. You need to keep it fun.
The longer I sit here, the more I can feel that hug. You know?
Yeah,
So I can feel her arms, so that's nice.
well, thank you.
You know, I've gotten a hug like that before, it feels good.
Do you have anything in the chat?
Kit had to go.
Oh.
They said that, they love your work. And they wanted to thank you for spending the time with us today to share it, because they really appreciate it and they're excited to see your show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let us all know, so that we can, you know, help get the word out when your show happens.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah. And then you go peek in the studio next door. Those are it's my closets, my palette cleansing, beach painting. And some of the color drills that Mary has me. Mary suggested I do, that I realize I need to learn a lot more about color.
Does anyone at home have anything to say or add? All right.
It's been such a pleasure having you here, and I want to thank you for all of your time.
Oh my gosh, thank you guys. It's been a wonderful opportunity. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, I guess that mostly concludes our official programming for in-review. Thank you so much for coming, guys.
Thank you, everyone. For coming.
Feel free to stick around and explore the space and hang out, anything you need. Thank you so much.